Looks like we're good, right?
Just as it's still setting up for me, so yes.
Let me double check.
I just popped over to Twitch and faces were showing up there. And
Cool.
it says it's live, so.
Yep, I see it too. So I think we're
Awesome.
good. All right, are we cool to start? All right, Derek is on PTO today, so will not be joining us. So I will take over in his absence, if that's okay with everybody. All right, so just a couple of quick announcements to get started. As usual, we alternate between this working group and the docs clinic. So next week at the same time is our next docs clinic, and that one is going to be led by me. And then the week after that, normally we would have another docs working group on November 26th, but that is a holiday in the US. Therefore, I think we will not be having that working group which means the next one will be December 10th. So is everybody cool with that? Sound good? Okay.
Sounds reasonable.
I figure if we have anything that needs to be taken care of between now and then, we can just have an internal meeting or something. So anyway.
Yeah, and then just post something to the channel if something else comes up.
Yeah,
I think that's great.
Like the only thing I can think of is what we're talking about today with the conversion of the SALT training manual over to the core docs. We might want to, take care of some tasks before December 10th for that, but that can be coordinated offline, I think, or something. So,
or sort of asynchronously or whatever. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. So, all right. So, the first agenda item I had was just a quick report on SaltConf, which took the place of our last docs working group meeting 2 weeks ago. I thought it went really well. The breakout session was led by Derek. We had about 30 attendees, and they included people from not only the US and Canada, but also the Netherlands, Sweden, Spain, and the Philippines, of all places. So pretty good. In that meeting, we announced our working group project to take Alan Kugler's SALT training manual and make it available to the larger community. And the idea is that those will, we aren't going to get rid of the core open SALT docs. Those will still remain. But these will kind of take over as being like the true core SALT docs for newbies and stuff like that. Not talking about the modules or functions or things like that. This is just for people to learn about SALT and understand how they work because they're really well written. They've been vetted by our subject matter experts and consultants, and it's been tested with customers, and I think it's a pretty good little manual. So I think it'll be a really good thing for the community to have. So we announced that at the SaltConf, and excited to get started on that. So that's going to be the main topic of today, is talking about that project. Our hope is that by having a really cool project like this, it'll help get people more engaged with the docs working group and with documentation in general. So we'll see if that bet pays off. All right, so we have a couple of logistical, you know what, in fact, I realized I haven't shared my link to the meeting notes. Let me put that in the chat here. And I will also put them on the stream. So there's the meeting notes. All right, so as you can see, I've written kind of a bunch of things that we need to talk about in order to get this project ramped up and ready for people in the community to contribute to. I just kind of listed off what I thought we needed to do, but we can easily add anything to this list. the first thing that we probably need to tackle is making that that the file of the training materials available in some format. It needs to be scrubbed a little bit of some of the identifying materials from it. I don't think it'll take very long, but it just needs to be kind of prepped to be put into a state where it can be shared with the community. So that's something that we need to do, and I can volunteer to take that task on if everybody's okay with that. Then the next thing that we need to do, this is not something I can do, and this is unfortunate we don't have Derek around to help with this, but the next thing we need to do is kind of figure out what we're going to do repo wise to handle this doc set. I think generally, and people can tell me if my assumption is correct, but my thought is that we're going to begin separating out these docs from the main SALT project and make it its own repo, which can give us a lot of good advantages, like not having to run a million tests on docs that aren't applicable to docs, that kind of thing. Making it easier to get your environment set up to contribute to docs in a way that you don't have to do if you're not going to contribute to the core SALT project itself, and a bunch of other things like that, So is my assumption right on that? The idea of creating a separate repo for this new doc set?
Yeah, I think that's what we've talked about the whole time, and I think that that's fine. I guess my only question is, do we want it to be that standalone kind of? That's what we usually have done. I just don't know if that's actually right, I guess, or what we want to continue to do, to have a separate repo that is just containing this project and only this project of docs. And I think that's fine. And then what do we want to call it?
Yeah. So things like that. So it's a good question what we should call it. Like, it could probably just simply be SALT docs, or something like that. And it can eventually be, what I wonder is, like, to your point, like, will it just contain these files? Or should we start migrating some other things over? For example, getting started. Could it live in this repo in some way? I'm just throwing out examples.
Yeah.
Should the installation guide part of repo.saltstack.com, does that need to live? Like, should that be in this repo? I'm just tossing out. Were there other doc sets that you were thinking of when you were asking that question?
Well, we had thought about that for some other things as well. Like when we look at anything that doesn't have like a .py file attached to it, where do we make that delineation? And maybe we need to make that decision before we know what may or may not go into this repo. And so we could just start with it being something generic for this singular project. And then we could open it up later. If we give it a generic enough name, I think that would work. Like SALT docs. I don't know if SALT docs is something we can use because we can't rename, but we've moved things around so much. I just don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go look.
No worries.
And then
go ahead, Wade.
Just for a little bit of extra flavor too, I know one of the reasons that the docs exist within the SALT project, at least as currently deployed, is so that it's possible to actually like look up documentation for SALT things from within SALT.
Right.
And so
we need to make that definition, right?
I was going to say, so there's some type of dependency graph there that we need to formalize and say, okay,
that's fair.
We want to do this, whether it's build this and then build SALT, and this is a dependency, or vice versa, or whatever it is. But
yeah, that's fair. Now, obviously, the state modules and the module documentation, that obviously has to stay inside the SALT project. That's not a question in my mind, but is there anything else that you can think of, like just shooting from the hip off the top of your head?
One thing that, just off the top of my head, we've got stuff like the formulas and other kind of ancillary projects that are, useful, but maybe not typically considered like core to Salt. Another one around that, I think it's actually part of Salt, but like Salt Check. And then there are just other bits and bobs. And then we've also been talking a lot, I think getting closer to making some decisions and actually getting it, getting some of the modules that are like less core to Salt extracted into somewhere else. And so there's some question there too, like,
Yeah.
okay, one, how do we keep those, that documentation, and also like, how do we let people know, oh, if you want these things, go there, go there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's a little bit of a periphery thing, but I think that when we've thought about that, we have thought about documentation for those as we move forward. And I think that's there. I don't know that it encompasses the scope here so much, but I do wonder about some things that are just, if you go look at salt/doc and some of just those files that are in there, is there anything in there that doesn't belong? Well, I'm not sure. And I think that's a conversation that we could have over time. That's why I'm kind of like, I'm of the thought that if we make a separate repo for this, maybe we keep the name a little bit generic and can decide that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But I would actually go with something that's not Salt Docs or not Get Started, some of those things that we've reused so many times.
Yeah, no worries. So let's define like what kind of stuff is going to go into this. So these training materials themselves basically just cover, I can share my screen. I will be careful what what I'm showing on it, but so I'll show you what these cover. It's basically, we've got a SALT overview. It talks about the topology, how to do YAML, how to install, config, and start, which is handy stuff. It's a whole chapter explaining grains, giving use cases and things like that. We've got the SALT execution framework, the shallow version. Then we've got how to do salt states and all the stuff related to that. How to use Jinja with salt. Then we've got a chapter on pillar, map files, beacons, reactors, runners and orchestration, state requisites and declarations, state system behind the scenes, salt SSH, troubleshooting, salt job scheduling, salt execution and architecture in depth, salt security, and that's basically what it is. That's some good stuff there. It's basically what's core to Salt is what's covered in this. It doesn't cover I noticed it doesn't cover proxy minions or things like that. Proxy minions are something that could be added potentially, but this is a really good starting space for anybody who would want to jump into Salt and really understand it. If they were to go through these kind of materials, I feel like they can understand Salt and get up and running with Salt with this stuff. So that's kind of the scope of it currently. So what's the best way to like frame that or think about that and how it relates to our overall project and doc structure for Salt?
I think that's really the key question, and I'm interested to maybe even pose that to the core team a little bit, because I think that their reaction, and Wayne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, would be that we should bring these into our docs. And I think that that's exactly what we're not doing for a reason.
Yeah.
Right. And I would just want to make sure that that's well explained and that we have that sort of, what do I want to call it, like elevator speech that says this is why we're putting it in a separate repo and this is why we want to separate it out. And I think that if you dig into that, even though we're looking at a high level from like that table of contents, it's giving some really deeper examples and how-tos and use cases, right? And so it's actually very different from the documentation that we have inside of Salt. And so I do think that it would be appropriate to have it in its own separate repo.
That sounds
But that's all I've got today. So Wayne, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, but I was just going to suggest that sounds like an accurate interpretation that, you know, I think there'd be an inclination to include it within SALT. And, you know, I don't know, it's one of those things that it's a trade-off, right?
Right.
So it's I guess the benefits to sticking it in the SALT repo is that it's very, kind of lockstep, right? It's right there along with SALT. And so as SALT grows and whatnot, it's there. You don't have to go searching for things in a different space. But then
and also I would say, like, when somebody clones the project, they've got the docs, that kind of a thing. Yeah,
exactly. And so there's that perspective and that thought process there. But on the other side, as we've seen, you know, sometimes it can take longer than we would want to get certain things into the documentation, just simply because it's more or less following kind of the existing process of merge and with the code freeze and everything along with that. So I think there's a balance, right?
yeah.
And I don't think that any of these approaches are necessarily wrong. We have to decide which things we want to accept and then accept those things.
Yeah, I agree. Let me talk about one other thing. So if let me just run through a couple of scenarios to make sure I understand in my mind. We've played out a little bit of the scenario of we've got a separate repo. I want to play through the scenario in which it stays in the inside the SALT project. One of my hesitations about the current SALT docs are that they're gigantic. There's so much there, and it's not well organized. It doesn't have a good information architecture built around it to help people navigate it. I know people who have used SALT for years know how to navigate those docs, but I don't, and a new user doesn't. And it's not easy to get into. My question is, what happened? Like, do we just like throw these docs on top of that without doing anything to massage those core docs?
No, I think we would.
We're making it messier and uglier, you know.
Well, we could. I think the other thing is to inject. So everywhere where we know that these go, that we start injecting them into the files that exist today instead of just on top of, right? So mesh instead of on top, and that would be a much larger project.
Exactly.
I'm not sure that's actually the right answer either, but that's what I would say, is that if we do think that that needs to go into the code base for some reason, that's probably I think that's what the core team would also agree with, is that it would need to go in place where they are today, not on top of. Okay. What am I looking for when I say that? It's the word I'm looking for. Inject is the only word I've got today. It's not the right word.
I know what you mean. It's kind of like supplant, replace it, that kind of thing, as opposed to like just put it all together. I would want to retain an archive just in case just to make sure we don't have any data loss, because there might be some good material in that big pile of stuff that we don't want to lose, you know?
Yeah, and so we could talk about that workflow. Like even if we decided that eventually we wanted some of this stuff to live in the SALT repo for a specific reason, I think that could be done. We could also say that we want to start it as a separate repo because we don't know where this goes and we need to take it apart. And we'd like to do that without the rest of the code base so that we can kind of see where that needs to live.
That's another good point, that it could always be added in later, in theory, that kind of a thing.
Or pieces of it, because maybe we start getting into this and pieces of it really don't fit into the code base and some pieces do. And then that's where just having it in that same org, but a separate repo, we could then, open up a PR and say, from this, I've forked it and I put it into the repo as this, or links or some other things like that. And that's kind of getting into the weeds of it. But I think that's, at first blush, I think that may occur. So I actually would rather say, instead of saying we're only going to make it a separate repo or we're only going to put it into Salt, that we make that more flexible. And I think the flexible way is to make it a separate repo, so we could make that decision as we learn more.
Yeah,
so I'm not going to know that till I know it.
because like I can see some advantages of having it in the core repo. There are a few things that I would want to resolve, you know, to make it less
Right.
painful first.
Sure.
And I would also want to, if we did adopt the mesh strategy, that's a, like you say, a much bigger project, and we would need to really make sure that everybody is okay making that kind of dedicated effort, because that's a big effort.
It's a big
You know,
effort.
so
I almost think of it as like the ports to master, that we would almost like cherry pick some things that we've identified to go into the Salt code base from this other repo and make it a standalone project where we would have, like, you know, port jams or whatever we call them. And that's almost how I see that would happen.
Yeah, I could see that, where like, so we've got this separate repo, it's been developed, it's in the place where we want it to be. And then you can kind of gradually pull it over and have structure for doing that, as opposed to, it's nice because like there's so many tasks involved in the enmeshing strategy, but this way you can do it in phases. So it'd be like, okay, here's your repo here, and we've got it where it needs to be, and this phase is done. Now we can begin the migration phase, where we're, you know, as opposed to trying to do exactly, as opposed to trying to like do a migration on top of, while you're also doing all this other work. So
and it may lead to some other projects like it. One that comes to mind is, we've talked about it for a long time, and we never know where to start with it. It's the table of contents for the Salt Open Docs, that it feels like it just sort of exists. Doesn't have any rhyme or reason. It doesn't actually have any flow. It doesn't map out to anything, you know, like URL wise necessarily. Like, you can't navigate to some of those pages. They just exist. You need to know that they're there. And so there's some, that's a huge project. So we never eat that elephant, right? We never even take a bite. But it may expose some things like that, where we go, I'd really like this piece to be in the repo, but it can't today until we do this piece. And can I separate that out and make it a standalone, or can I fix that in some way? I think that's okay.
The more you talk about it, the more it just seems like that's the easier approach. Like, because it doesn't rule out the other approach, you know.
Exactly,
it says we can still do it, you know. So well, so my question is, do we need to have some sort of follow-up meeting with the core Salt team to discuss this? And how big do we want to keep it targeted to just this little project, or do we want to talk about even bigger things, like the strategy for the Salt docs period, or something like that?
Well, we should probably have that discussion at some point.
Yeah, I just don't have
that one.
That one I would still need to. I have ideas about it, and I know how I would go about doing it, but I haven't thought through it all the way yet. So
interesting. I would love to hear your ideas sometime. To let the core team know, I can simply put it on an agenda item and say, does anybody have comments about this? Does anybody have concerns? Are there any questions about starting this? And then having the flexibility to either, you know, put it into the core Salt code base, or leave it as is once we dive into it tomorrow. And I'll just let you know, and can put it back into the notes for this. I actually don't anticipate anything else except for what we've talked about.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm surprised.
Yeah, and I think one idea or thought that that I've had, and this is kind of a current weakness with our current approach as well, but just the idea of pointing, basically. So to use a story as illustration, when I would have a garage sale, and I wanted the most people to show up to my garage sale, I would think about the different possibilities to approach our house, right? And so it turned out I could take, I think it was 7 different signs, and then anybody coming into our town would be able to follow those signs from whichever point they ended out at. Um,
That's cool.
and so, I had 2 kind of in the main drag, and then there were a couple of different approaches you could take from there, depending on if you hit up other garage sales or something. But then I would, at every intersection, I would go ahead and add, oh, hey, my garage sale is this way. My garage sale is this way. So eventually, if somebody wanted to come to mine, then they could follow the signs at each intersection. And I feel like we don't really have that in our docs right now. And as we do this approach, especially if we like, for instance, have some docs going faster in a different repository or whatever it is that we do, just putting in a few things that says, oh, hey, go look there for a little bit more documentation. Go look over there for a little bit more documentation, and start finding these different places that people will come in and start to see things, so that instead of just kind of what we have today, which is kind of like, you know what it is you're doing and you go look for that specific thing that matches what you already know how to do, or you just kind of give up and maybe you ask somebody for help somewhere else. But I think if we point more, that will be a really great successful thing for SALT and the documentation.
So are you talking about like making things discoverable, like different features of SALT, like different things you can do with SALT that maybe people aren't aware of, that kind of thing?
That's definitely part of it, I think. But like, for instance, we have, a hacking docs and a contributing doc, and then we have the official documentation, and we have,
we have an HTML contributing and an RST contributing,
and we have a Slack channel, and then there's SALT on IRC, and there's all these different places that people can go, but we don't have good linking between them to say, oh, hey, you might actually be interested in something over here, or something over here, or something over here. And
we've even talked about that as in a template, like if you want to see just high level, it only opens up a little bit, and then you can expand it out, but then to also link to other documentation that would go further, right? And go into more examples. And I do think that this project, as we understand it today, and that could change piece by piece, is really that like deeper understanding, right? That we would want to point. And then we could even point to it in many other ways, which I think is what Wayne is talking about, where we have it almost as dynamic, right? So if we go down this path and somebody starts something new in SALT, or we put a new feature into SALT, or we change something, that this would also be a way that we could go even deeper, and maybe that documentation would get smaller in the code base, run a little faster. But when you want to really understand something, you would come to this repo and point to it. And you have a few examples, that you can see in the main code base, but then we can point to this and even go further.
I really like that. And I think that is actually one of the crucial ways of like improving the navigation of the docs, is not just like, how do I navigate inside this doc, but how do I navigate to other resources, to other doc sets across the environment. Some good news about that. Serena has developed a really nice design for the material theme that will give us more of that capability. And another piece of good news is that some of the front-end developers on the SaltStack config side are like, I've got at least one who's willing to like make some contributions to the material theme to do what we want it to do.
I bet I know who that is.
And so because they're not like crazy busy right now, they are busy but not that busy right now. So I think that
Yeah.
the good news is that we'll be able to do a lot of those things that we want to do, converting these docs into the material theme.
Cool. Very
So
cool.
so yeah, that's a something that we'll be able to do, and we can build that out as we go when we're working on this project. So anyway.
Nice.
Cool. So if we look at our logistical challenges and potential action items, you're going to go through the first one, the file availability.
And
the
let's
repo.
see, let me commit to when I'll have that done.
Sure.
Because that helps me.
Totally.
I think I can commit to do it by end of next week. So I can do that.
And repo creation, I can help with that. I think we would need to come up with a name, and I am not good at this. So I'm very bad. Like I would probably call it salt training. That's not a very good name, but it's kind of crucial, so we know the name, but I can help create it.
The other thing is, I wonder if Derek would want us to use the pop seed model that he's been doing. Like he has this kind of core documentation set that he likes to have every project start with. He might want us to use that for this project so that we start off on the right foot with the right settings and configurations and things like that.
So the pop seed was, I know that's in GitLab, but we talked about making that just barely for GitHub too.
Oh,
so,
okay.
So it may not determine which tool it's in, and we could still have access to that. So just FYI, I think that is going to be available very, very soon, like next week.
Oh, good. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. So we can maybe utilize that. Do you think that the repo creation, sorry, do you think the repo creation task is dependent on Derek's presence? Like, do we need to wait till he's back in order to make progress on that?
Okay. No, but we probably do want his opinion on the naming and the use of pop seed. So, because we can always go back and do that, but unless you guys have a name you want, I would steer away from salt docs. We use that sort of generally everywhere.
Not a problem. It's a little generic anyway.
Salt
it's
rocks.
Pretty generic. Salt rocks. Well, we have that too. Or we have rocker.
How about Derek will be back not next week, but the Tuesday after. And we can kind of make it like the goal of by end of day, we'll have a name to you. Is that okay to make it be that long? Okay.
I think that's fine.
He can also assist you that way and it'll be good.
Totally good. And by then we should have things for pop seed ready to go. So then I think it may actually be faster to just wait.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what we'll do on repo stuff. Okay, here's where I think you'll thrive, Sage. Conversion task project management. So now we need to think through how contributors will claim a topic to convert to RST, how they'll show their status on the conversion, and things like that. So options that come to my mind, and you might have other ideas, would be to like build out a GitHub project board, create a ticket that clearly explains, go to the document, take this piece and convert it to RST. Like we would need a contribution guide for this project probably, which is my next item. So we could track it on a spreadsheet. We could track it on GitHub. What are your thoughts on that?
So on this one, I think that we could do either. And there's some changes coming to GitHub for our repos, I think today or Monday, that make using a project board much easier, and so that we wouldn't need a spreadsheet. We could actually just do it there. And so that's my initial thought. And then I think we would need to kind of dive in a little bit to a couple of really get into the weeds of what exactly it is that we're working on, so that we know what those topics are. But then, yes, I would say we'll do it just like the regular project boards. We'll make, cards and issues in there. We'll do to do, doing, done, or sort of, if we need a blocked column, or if we want to do that with a label, and that we could even time box some of those things with milestones. I tend to like to use milestones, not so much in this case for a release, because I think we'd be working towards one release, so that milestones may not make sense, but the milestones could be like a time box piece of work that could be like 2 weeks or 4 weeks, something like that, to say, here's some things I'm going to get done in the work group by next work group, or 2 work groups later, sort of depending. And call those milestones.
Okay, so I like that idea. So we'll maybe in the same repo where we create this doc set, we can set up the project board there.
Absolutely.
They can be tied and all that kind of thing. So let's make sure we do that when we're also setting up the repo. And once that board is set up and we've got it how we want it to be, I'm okay. Like basically, we just need to kind of figure out how we could maybe try a couple of these sections. And like, for example, like, here we go. This chapter's 4 pages long. It could probably just be its own ticket. We could just figure out how we're going to divide up the work of how we're going to carve up this elephant and things like that into workable tickets. So we'll, like you say, we'll have to kind of work through that, and then just create the tickets once we kind of have an idea of what we're going to do. Maybe as a sample, we could try looking at one chapter specifically and thinking through the logistics of what it would take to do that one chapter, and then we'll have a good idea of what to tell people and how to build out the tickets and things like that. So.
Yeah, and that may even like give us our process, right? And then we can write that contributor guide. The process will get established, at least at the first blush, and then we can also say this is an iterative process. So when we know it's not working, we change, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we should probably put some points in there that we do kind of mini retrospectives where we could say this isn't working. And
yeah, good
I think
idea.
that would be good too. Yeah.
Okay.
I can come up with that kind of timeline once we kind of dig into that first session of one chapter. Then I can help with that, because I'm thinking it may be monthly, but it's hard to tell right now without diving in.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. Well, that sounds good. And then I guess the next question, we've already hinted at this a little bit, like we'll need to create a project contribution guide just to tell people how to contribute to it and give them instructions for what they're going to do. But beyond just creating a contribution guide, I wonder if we might want to work with Janae to develop a plan for rolling it out to the community to get some more participation in the project itself. When we're in a more state, when we're ready to take participants and things like that.
Yeah, so maybe that's like what we've done in the past, where we do a docs jam.
Yes,
maybe it's
exactly.
that, and maybe it's a clinic. We'll have to see. I think that either of those could actually work in this scenario. I'm kind of thinking docs jam, but
yeah, I lean a little bit more towards docs jam. It starts off with a big bang. There's something clear that everybody can work on. We can really work hard on getting people to show up and offering some incentives or something like that. Yeah,
the thing that I was thinking about with the docs clinic is that if we had a docs clinic where we go and we stream and we say, hey, the working group is kind of working on this process, on this project, but we haven't quite got down the contribution guide and the communication piece and how to get people involved. Like when we're in that phase that we're kind of like, we're almost ready to switch this on, we could do a clinic to kind of garner some support and some interest, and just kind of show it briefly at the clinic and maybe dive in if people had questions or if they wanted to see where we were. And then I think it is about some communication planning where we could say, and this is something I wanted to bring up today, that we're going to start doing. When we started the working groups, there was like, in Kavia's mind, she had this perfect plan and she didn't really tell Sage. Then I found Kavia's plans and they were extensive and they were like project plans that were pages and pages long, and I'm still not really sure what they were for. But what I'd like to do going forward is that sort of every release cycle, we have a project charter that's for each working group. And a project charter is 1 page, maybe 2, and it just has all the information on it for the working group that they're doing. So it has their goal, it has their captain, it has the people that are involved, where they keep their notes or their project board or whatever it is that they have, and what it is they're working towards in their time frame.
Yeah.
So just real basic information. So this gives us a really good time to start that, because we could fill that out specifically with this in there to say for the next sort of release cycle or term. We don't use, for the working groups, we don't necessarily say release cycle. So it's sort of 1 release cycle or 2, sort of depending. And we could say, if you get a big project like this and you think it's going to take longer, then say that. Then your term is, 2 release cycles. And then that also
being a 2-term
yes
kind of a thing. So, because it's going to
then
take
also
at least half a term to just ramp up, to get this project ready. And then in that time, the holidays are going to hit. So
it makes it also kind of interesting. That's why I say a term, is because it's not really a release cycle. And so I think that would also give us that piece of like, okay, so where also are your communication pieces? And we could build out a communication plan, which again, a communication plan to me is like a single page. We're going to communicate this often with these people in these places, and we're going to do it, and then we're going to keep it. And this is where it historically will be kept, so that everybody knows where to find it, where they should have seen it, and where they can find it again. And that I think will help a project like this. So we also have some dates that we're trying to hit, and we also know how we're going to communicate it going forward.
Yep, I like it. At what point do you see us creating that document for this particular project? Like, what kind of what should we shoot for that?
Soon. I think that I want to. So I have a template out in Google Drive somewhere that I need to go find and update to make it very generic and usable. And I wanted to try to put that into something that was not a Google Doc, like an MD file or something, so that people can use it. And I need to do that. So I'm thinking that we'll roll those out kind of the end of the month. So you guys should have it about the same time that we're creating the repo and everything. And
yeah, that'll be perfect.
Fine.
Yeah,
okay.
Awesome. Okay. So I had identified like just a couple of barriers to completing this project in this release cycle. And and I think everybody it sounds like everybody agrees with me that we might not get this all the way done in this release cycle, which is good. But so I had just mentioned that we only have a few working group meetings. We'll have even less because of the holidays and things like that. So any other like threats or barriers that we need to discuss or consider or anything like that?
I think that we, not to call it possible barriers, but I think what we can do is to say, let's really limit the scope of this for the release cycle to be, let's get it up and running. Let's really establish the project and the working group's role and how it's going to function sort of long term.
Can you tell me when aluminum is scheduled to come out?
Mid-February.
Okay. That seems reasonable within this time frame. Like, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, you know what, aluminum might just be about ramping up to do the project. Yeah. Getting all the pieces in place.
And I'm even
Okay.
thinking that if our goal is to say we have the project charter and the communication plan and the project board in place, and we know what needs to be accomplished and could even execute, although maybe not complete, but we have the plans to execute a docs jam, that would be awesome for this release cycle, right? That would
Yeah.
be great. Because then the next one we could say our plan is to execute this docs jam so many times. Maybe it's twice, maybe it's once, and that'll, and then to continue and to say, and then we'll also do a retrospective for the entire time. We'll also see where we are and if anything needs adjusted for the process, and move forward with any other adjustments. Like, do we need more tickets for this that we haven't planned yet? Or did something come up that we want to adjust for?
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Anything else we want to say about this particular project for now?
I don't think so.
I think we've covered some good ground. So, all right. My next item on here is I wanted your help picking what I should do for my docs clinic. So the ideas that I came up with were working on promoting and working on this working group conversion project. It sounds like it might be a little too premature to do that for next week, which is fine. I thought about, if you would like, I could spend that time helping us consolidate our contributing guides.
I would love that.
Yeah, good. And then the other idea I had was, like, I've been working a lot on proxy minions, and so I've got the knowledge about proxy minions in my head right now, and it's a good time to dump that knowledge and improve the proxy docs. So that was another idea I had thought of. Any opinions?
So I'll tell you that improving the proxy minion docs is probably as big as this project that we're looking at right here.
I could see that. I could see that.
Because there's a lot of stuff where we say, this is true for proxy minions, but it's not necessarily true in your use case, whatever that is. Like, are you doing, minion swarm? Are you doing this in Docker? Are you doing this? Like, there's some things that happen there where it's not obvious in the documentation, but we know it, kind of depending on where it is. So that one may just be too big to do in a clinic.
Yeah, no, that seems fair. And that's kind of what I figured for that too. But if you think it's like an even bigger thing than just like in my mind, improving the proxy docs were like a sprint level task. But if it sounds to you like a release level task, in terms of the amount of work it would take, then that helps.
I think it is. And
Yeah.
that is, I don't know that it's actually full release. I think it would fit into a release, but it's more than a sprint, if that helps you.
No, that helps me to kind of get an idea of how much work there is to be done. Because I will say those docs were just not helpful to me, and I would love to make them better. So.
No kidding.
No,
so
I
maybe,
wanted helpful
maybe consolidating. Yeah, maybe consolidating the contributing guide. And you may have a piece of this project that you could take to the clinic. Like if you're looking at that file availability, that could be just that piece. So I don't know.
Sounds good. Well, so if you're leaning towards that, I need a little bit of, like, do we have any kind of ticket that's tracking this so that I could get myself up to speed on the project?
So I had a ticket in GitLab that's hidden, but you can see it. And it's closed because it was my planning meeting. So then I put notes in the planning meeting ticket, but then we never moved forward. But this is the best ticket that kind of gives some explanation. And unfortunately, I'm not going to share that with everybody here because it's behind everything else.
No worries,
but
I'll get it from you.
This will help us to kind of move forward, I guess. I don't think that I don't think that we have a good plan to move forward. And this was just our brain dump, and that's all I've got.
Okay.
We did say that we would like to have one source of truth and then be able to update other pages if we wanted to keep the 5. So there's 6 pages. if you include the frequently asked questions, and some of those are just the different formats. So there's an RST format and there's an HTML format or whatever. And some of them are very different. There's the MD file called contributing, and then there's the HTML called contributing, and those have vastly different information on them. So there's some confusion there. We get some things from GitHub if we use an MD file instead of an RST file for contributing. But we have both because I think we started with the RST file. So there's some history behind that.
That makes
but
sense.
we did want to have, but we did want to have, like, if there's one source of truth that is very high level, almost like a table of contents of contributing that said, if you're looking for this, go here. If you're looking for this, go here. If you're a sysadmin and you're using Salt, you would use this. Or if you're developing Salt, you go through this path. That's kind of where we ended. Which one is the source of truth? We never decided. Not sure.
No worries, no worries.
Where we are.
I did want to check, like, is this still in scope? Is it something we still definitely want to tackle? Like, I just want to make sure that it's something that you care about me working on. That's all.
Yes. In fact, if I could get more people to work on it, I would. Wayne even has some stuff on hacking I think in a PR that's still open to update some hacking stuff that I'm like, yeah, gosh, I really want to get to that too. And it's, we definitely want to work on it. I think we need to break it up into sizable chunks to do.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. Well, that sounds exciting. I actually really enjoy working on community level docs, in my other open source life that is not related to Salt. Right now I'm working on a big project to get my community's code of conduct in place. And that's quite the task, let me tell you.
I bet.
But
I bet.
I enjoy working on these kind of community docs. They're fun, tough projects, but fun, so.
Yeah. I think that, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
They engage they're kind of writing process, I guess. So yeah, you have to think about more things. Well, I think that's all on my agenda. Was there anything else anybody wanted to bring up?
I think the only other thing I wanted to say in this working group is that, of course, we are having some branding changes as we move towards being acquired by VMware, and that more information will come about that. We'll see some things change, and I'll have more details. And with that, we'll also try to make it more available of when things are happening, how that's going to affect things. But like for this group, you guys's meeting ID, the Zoom meeting ID that has been constant will change because we're moving those. And so I think we used to have that published in the Docs Hub repo. So we'll just want to update that. Things like that.
I'll check
it's not
that.
Anything. Yeah, it's not anything like that's like, oh, we're changing, everything. No, it's small stuff. The Zoom IDs will change. The calendar will be in a different spot. So we'll make sure you guys have that. It's available to you.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of Doc's working group for the day then.
Okay.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, Sage. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your contributions. So, all right. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.